Hi, I'm John deSteiguer, the president of Oklahoma Christian University. We are thrilled when we bring guests to our campus in all sorts of situations. I am especially thrilled that we have Amy Green with us today. Amy's a game designer and has just done some really remarkable things. Amy, welcome to Oklahoma Christian.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
You know, sometimes the gaming industry is viewed as being kind of a fairly dark, difficult place that people often don't think about faith infusing the area, but you bring some special sense to this. So it's really special for us to have you on campus.
Oh, thank you so much.
I want to ask you about your family, and I especially want to ask you about your son, Joel. Can you tell me about him?
Absolutely. Joel was our third son. We had 3 little boys. Our first son, we got married. My husband and I got married young. We were married at 21, and we had my first son when I was 24. And a couple years later, another little boy, and a couple years after that, another little boy. And our lives just felt kind of like the lives of all of our friends and family. We were just kind of being a family, doing our thing. And I think my biggest complaint was that I couldn't have a little girl. I didn't know why we didn't have a daughter. And I think that just shows how our lives were kind of just progressing down this typical path that we thought would always keep marching happily along. And just after Joel's first birthday, he was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And it just shocked us. There was nothing that seemed further from possible for our family. Everyone had been healthy. These weren't things that we grew up fearing or thinking could happen to us. And it just shifted everything for us to have a son with cancer. It just felt like a totally different world. And Joel had just started to stand up, not quite walk, and he wasn't quite talking yet. And suddenly we were spending 3 weeks in the hospital with him as they removed his tumor surgically, and we started learning about chemotherapy and radiation. And it changed everything for us to have a son with cancer. But he was so sweet, such a sweet, joyful, delightful little boy. A lot of the treatments that he received just kind of stunted his development. He didn't learn to walk till he was 3, even though he was about to walk when he first got sick. And even by the time he was 5, he just had a handful of words. So we always felt like we kind of had a toddler for 5 years. And so we got all the joy and delight and passion and excitement that comes with a toddler for 5 years. And so loving him and learning how to love him, especially once we found out that his cancer had returned and that he had a terminal diagnosis and that he would die, figuring out how to invest everything we had into loving him, knowing that the more we loved him, the more we stood to lose. It just absolutely changed us as a family.
Amy, that breaks my heart again just to hear you talk about that. Now, he had 2 older brothers, and they were close in age to him, but they were still young when this first diagnosis occurred. And I think I heard a story about you beginning to tell the 2 older brothers a story about Joel, and it went on for quite some time.
It did. They knew that Joel had cancer, but they were 3 and 5. So what cancer even means at that age is so nebulous. We explain it the best ways we can, and we know that whatever picture it is our words are painting in their brain is probably still not accurate, even though they would say, oh, I understand, but I don't even fully understand cancer on a biological level, so how could they? But we did our best to talk to them about it as things were happening, and they would pray with us for Joel. And then when our doctors explained that Joel would die, it was a totally new conversation. We didn't know how to have that conversation with our sons because we were still praying for Joel to be healed. We were still praying in faith, and we wanted them to be able to keep praying with us, but we also didn't want them to have no idea that things had shifted in this major way and that Joel could die. And I remember my dad told me, I think what would be really wonderful is if your sons knew that if Joel did die, that he fought hard and that God was so proud of him and that he had earned his rest and that God was so pleased at how he had fought and how he could welcome him home. And I thought about that, and it broke my heart. I didn't want to have to tell my sons that. I wanted to tell them that their brother was going to be healed and everything was going to be okay. And so I thought a lot about what my dad said, and I started to tell my sons a bedtime story every night. So I'd tell them about Joel as this brave knight, and they'd say, a baby knight? And I'd say, yeah, Joel, the brave baby knight, and he's fighting this dragon called Cancer. And so every night we'd tell a little bit more of the story, and we'd make it clear exactly, they'd tell me, Mom, a baby can't beat a dragon. And I said, yeah, but God fights with Joel, so God can do anything. And we'd talk through this, but I wanted them to know what was at stake, but I didn't want to have to tell them the ending yet, because I didn't know the ending yet. And I didn't want them to have to live for however long with this looming ending, so we just kept telling the story a day at a time. And actually, they had given Joel 2 to 4 months when his tumor returned. That was just before he turned 2. And Joel lived to be 5. So my boys ended up outgrowing that story. We never even, by the time he died, it was something they could understand. We didn't have to go back to the story, but that was kind of how we continued to talk about what was at stake and exactly what Joel's realities were.
Well, God bless you, Amy. And it was out of that story that arose this game. Talk to me about that. I mean, that dragon Cancer. I mean, what a beautiful thing. So you developed it with a team. So talk about that. Was this going on at the same time?
Sure. So, boy, when my son had been terminal for probably close to a year, we started to learn how to live with a child with a terminal diagnosis. At first, when we thought we had 2 to 4 months, there's nothing else to even think about, right, except how do we do this? How do we walk with him through this? How do we guide our family through this? But as Joel responded better to palliative treatment than anyone thought he would, and we got used to some times that were pretty good, and life felt pretty normal, and we realized that he wasn't just dying, he was living, and he was living with this diagnosis, and we were able to live with this diagnosis. So we started to think creatively again and think about how could we share what's happening with other people, because my husband and I are both artists and we're creative, and we're thinking about how do I express this, because it was changing us. It was changing everything about us. It changed how we loved, it changed how we viewed people, it changed the decisions we were making, because we were constantly aware of the fact that our life here is short and that it is limited and it's not guaranteed. And it was having such a profound effect on us that we wanted to think about how we could share some of that with people. And we had this idea of that dragon he was fighting called Cancer because of the story we were telling. And so we talked together a lot about what we could do to share that. And at first we kind of thought about film, and I thought about, could a film have different endings so that parents could walk their children through different endings like we wanted to, and is there a way that we could kind of make a metaphorical radiation, maybe if the knight's facing radiation, then it's a desert and it's hot and it's just thinking about all the different symptoms and how we could portray those. And eventually, as we kept talking about it, we realized that what we were really describing wasn't a film at all, that it was more of a video game. And so it was fun to get to think in those terms with my husband, who's a programmer, so it was a natural fit for him anyway. And he had done a lot of game design, and I would help out here and there, and I'd give him little ideas, and I'd kind of write some things, but I always just thought he's a game designer, and I'm just his wife, and I'm just helping out. But as we made this game for Joel, and especially after Joel died when he was 5 years old, we were about halfway through the game design process at that point. And it mattered to me so much what was in his game, what we were communicating, it was this memorial, and I wanted to be part of building it with my husband for him and our team. We had an artist and a sound designer and another programmer, and there was a small team that was helping build this game with us. But I realized I didn't just want to be helping out, I wanted to be part of the team. And so that is actually what shifted me into game design, into realizing no, I am a game designer and I'm a writer for video games, and I kind of was able to own my position within it because I cared so much about his story.
Now, that game went on to win a very prestigious award, the Impact Award. And I think it's touched people's lives all over the world. In fact, you've traveled internationally talking about Joel and talking about that dragon Cancer. It's just been remarkable, the kind of impact that it has had.
It certainly has. It's not something that we ever would have imagined, except that as we started developing it, just right away we could tell that that there was a lot of interest. It felt like God was opening doors for us that we could never have opened, and people were interested and they were writing about it, and we were surprised all along by just how much the story was capturing people's interest. Now, when we first were making the game, we thought, well, it's because God's going to heal Joel, and so he wants everyone to see this story because he's so excited to show off what he's about to do to heal our son. And that didn't end up being how his story went, and yet I think that it has surprised me how impactful our story of loss has been. It's not the story that I really wanted to share with the world, but I think it's a story that the world understands, and maybe that the world needs. That I have been guilty as a Christian of coming across like, oh, victory, and we're victorious, and we overcome, and just all the things that we're promised as Christians. And I think we kind of present a front that maybe doesn't let people see some of the real life impact that we have. And we have been honored to travel the world talking about Joel, and it's such a gift to me, because I think oftentimes when a child dies, people aren't sure what to say, and they don't know how to bring him up or how to ask about him, so you just don't get to talk about him as much as you'd like to. And so to be invited to go these places and speak his name is always such a gift to me. And we never forget that all of this, the awards and the conferences and the places we go, it's just because of Joel and because of this hard thing that we lived. And so we carry him with us as we go, and I think we can't take too much credit for anything we did, because it wasn't even the story we wanted to tell. It was something God was doing with and around us.
So in your TEDx talk, Amy, I loved a couple of lines, and one of your lines was, hey, the award was special, but you know what, even more special is a photograph or a memory of Joel. That's so sweet.
No, absolutely. All of those. There's been some big moments that I've looked forward to and been excited about when the film came out, or when an article was written that I was especially excited about. And those moments are exciting, and you live in those moments and they fade. You feel the joy of being honored or recognized, and that all fades. None of it lasts. It doesn't change you tomorrow. Your life doesn't move forward any differently. And for all of the opportunities we've had because of making this video game, I always say I would trade those for 5 more minutes with Joel. Even the worst 5 minutes we had with him, I would trade all of it for those 5 minutes again. And yet, I think that's maybe part of the joy that we have in Christ, which is that this life is short and that eternity is long, and that this is a flash. And so I think we see it sometimes in those awards and in those recognitions and the accomplishments, that they all feel kind of quick. None of them feel like this eternal lasting thing, and it helps you remember that that's not what this life is actually about.
Boy, that is such a great perspective, because I think much of our world is racing after the recognition and the rewards, but it's also fleeting compared to eternity. Something else that you said, and I just loved this as well. We all prefer to win. We all want to win. But when we come to that point and realize we're not going to win this, then we determine really where our values are. And we're in a society that wants to win.
Oh, but absolutely. It's, I think, an amazing thing, because I think Jesus calls us to lose. That he said, come lay down your life. He says, come pick up your cross and follow me. But the world says we need to win. We need to go for it. We need to accomplish and achieve. And that's something actually that's really prevalent in video games, is that you should be able to master a video game. You should be able to solve the puzzle. You should be able to beat the boss. It's about overcoming and winning. And so it was odd to tell this story in a video game, because it's a game that you can't win. And it's about recognizing that we wanted Joel to win. We love to celebrate survivors in our culture. We are so excited for people who beat the odds. And yet there's people among us who have not, who've loved people who did not survive, who have situations in their life that they cannot win no matter what they do. And I think that the way that the church will come around and love those people would say a lot, but we can't do it if we're also trying to win. We kind of don't even notice the losers of the world if we're so focused on trying to win ourselves.
Wow. You also pointed out, Amy, I want to ask you, as a believer in Christ, did you feel that your back was against the wall, or that you were being discriminated against in this area, in this space? Because something you said earlier, that once upon a time the church was the patron of the arts. But over the last, I don't know, several hundred years, the church has retreated from that. And has that left it in an area that we really can't operate, or does it make it an area that we as Christians ought to try to operate all the more in because of the witness we have?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, the church has this great heritage, like you said, of investing in art, of commissioning art. And we have stepped away from that a little bit. We've let the government commission art, we've let corporations commission art, and the church has kind of stepped back a little bit. We've kind of created our own cultures of art. We have our own music, we have our own films, but every now and then you see someone that just makes something that speaks beautifully to the world and to Christians, or that makes a film just for the world, but with just the beautiful love of God coming through in every moment of it. And I think those pieces that really run and engage culture as a whole are sometimes the most profound experiences that we have. We were certainly aware that a story about our faith and our son and death was so foreign to most of the video game industry. There's a little pocket of kind of artsy independent games that will talk about these topics. And so we tried to be very blunt early on that this would be a story about our faith, that we didn't want anyone to support it on Kickstarter, to promote it, and then later feel surprised, like, oh, I didn't know that, this was about that. But actually what we found was that we had a seat at the table, that everyone was glad to welcome us in. They knew the content of our game, and that didn't bother them one bit. They were glad for us to tell our story. Right. And I think that we found that there's a lot of power in telling your own story, that if you're just talking about what you believe and what your story is and how you've experienced it, it doesn't come across as an agenda. It doesn't come across as preachy. It comes across as a human story, and people can relate to that on a human level. And so I absolutely think that the parts of culture that Christians think are the most dark is exactly where they belong. If you think that an area is so dark and scary and unredeemable, then you should go get the love of God shining in that area and see how it transforms and see the kind of beauty that can come out of even the most corrupted things. I mean, I think that's the coolest part of the gospel, is that it's not a gospel of like perfection, it's a gospel of redemption. And so we should always be looking for those parts of society that we think are most in need of redemption and run toward those.
I know you had some ups and some real downs also during this journey with Joel. I so understand that. Can a Christian be faithful in times of doubt and questions?
Oh, I think absolutely. That is something my husband he would always wrestle with his faith. It would infuriate me because I kind of grew up here in Tulsa and the Bible belts of Oklahoma, and just I was kind of a rah faith person that, of course God will do this, and we're going to thank him in advance, and I can just see what God's going to do next, and very, very faith focused. And my husband loved God and I think had a rich history of faith also, but he would question things and he would ask me why, and I would always feel like he was tearing his faith apart, and that scared me as his wife, especially as we were young, and we would get into debates and conversations, and I'd cry and go, I don't even know why are you trying to tear my faith down? I don't understand, because he was a wrestler. He would wrestle with faith, and it took years of Joel being sick and me kind of responding the way I would and he responding the way he would, for me to start to see that like his faith was different from mine, but it wasn't worse. His faith was more examined than mine was. And I was able to watch his model for years, that we would get a particularly bad report from the doctors, and he would sink into despair a little bit, and I would worry, and I would think, is this it? Like, is he throwing away his faith? And he would just go and tear things down and look at them and inspect them and rebuild them a little stronger, and I realized there was a real value to that. And that was such a great model for me once my son died, because we had seen years of miracles. So many times they thought he was going to die, and he didn't, and he was always saved. So when he actually died, I felt like the rug had been pulled out from under me. I didn't understand why God would save him for 4 years straight and then let him die. I didn't. So suddenly my faith felt like it was in the shambles on the floor. And suddenly it helped me a lot to know that I had seen my husband rebuild his faith so many times over, that I knew that that was not the end, that I'd watched the way he had questioned and struggled and wrestled, because for the first time in my life, I had really hard questions. And I think sometimes as Christians, when we have these hard questions and we have doubt and we are struggling, we look around for a model in the church of how to do that well, and we don't find one, so we think we don't belong in the church anymore. And I think there's a lot of agnostics and atheists who have walked away from the church because the church didn't seem like the place to wrestle with things, and they knew deep in their hearts that they were wrestling, and they couldn't show up every Sunday and pretend that everything was fine when they were wrestling so hard within themselves. But I think if the Christians who tend to wrestle would be willing to do that a little more publicly and be willing to show a model of what that looks like, I think there's a lot of people who are willing to engage with the mystery of God, who are willing to take the time to let God minister to them if they know that it's okay, that they have some doubts, that they still have some questions, that there's some things they want to work out, that they look at faith and go, I'm not sure that piece fits there. And we've been saying that piece fits, but maybe that's in the wrong place. And if we'll give people some freedom within their faith to explore, I actually think that we'll have a more holistic faith that is more welcoming to a lot more people than maybe it currently looks like.
Man, Amy, I am so sorry for you, and I am so grateful for you at the exact same time. Okay, so if a college student was watching this, what piece of advice would you have to give that college student?
Ooh, goodness, I think my biggest piece of advice is to be led by love and not to be led by fear. That as we want to go out and make our mark in the world and figure out where we fit and maybe share our story or figure out how to create something that we think could impact the world or change the world, I think we can be led either by the Holy Spirit and by that love for people and that compassion that God naturally puts in us, or we can be led a little bit by fear that maybe someone won't accept what we've made, or fear that some parts of the world are a little too dark to engage in. And so I would tell people just to do their best to recognize when they're being led by fear, because it happens to all of us that we get intimidated or we get scared or we worry about what other people will think. And I think when we do that, we start to create things more for the pocket of people we know and for our own little groups. But I think that if you can recognize early on, oh, I think I'm pulling back here because I'm afraid, and then run in the opposite direction and start thinking, okay, how do I risk more? How do I lay my life down in my art? How do I lay my life down to go and impact culture in this way, that we create very different things.
Wow. Amy Green, what a blessing she is. What a blessing you are to me, and you are while you're on the OC campus. Don't be led by fear, be led by love. And our gospel is not a gospel of perfection, it's a gospel of redemption. God bless you, Amy.
Thank you so
very
much.
much.
Absolutely.